Leading the discussion today is David Sturtz. David uses his deep background in design, content strategy, and product development to bring vision and innovation to Geonetrix healthcare solutions. He has tackled healthcare digital marketing challenges from all sides, from designing user-friendly information architectures to building content management software that runs websites for hundreds of healthcare brands. David has previously presented at SHSMD and frequently speaks on a variety of user experience and digital strategy topics. He holds a master's degree in library and information science from Drexel University and a bachelor's degree in design from the University of Northern Iowa. Without further ado, here's David.
Thanks, Shannon, and welcome everybody to our webinar this month. I'm excited to be talking about this topic of personalization. I know it's something that is top of mind for a lot of folks in healthcare, figuring out what to do with personalization strategy and how to move this forward. So I'm excited to dive into that topic today. And to kick that off, as Shannon kind of alluded to, I have a library background, and so my inner librarian wanted to come out today and think a little bit about where personalization fits and why this is a topic of interest, and thinking about the idea of a library and all of that information. In library school, there's kind of two sides of the coin that get addressed. One is, how do you organize all of this? The idea of the categorization and classification systems, things like Dewey Decimal systems and Library of Congress classification. But on the flip side of that is the human interaction side, and how you go through a reference interview in order to gather very quickly from a patron what information that they're looking for, what that information is, and how you can, as rapidly as possible, increase the relevance of the information that you're making available. So rather than setting them loose in this vast library with thousands and thousands of books and different data points and actions to be taken, how do we trim that down based on who they are, what questions they have, what they're going to do with the information, to the thing that is really going to make a difference in their life? And so the same question, I think, applies to us as healthcare marketers. How do we create processes and systems to rapidly increase the relevance out of that wealth of information and the options that are available in our digital experiences today? To start out with just a little bit of definition, I'd like to make sure we're kind of on the same page and thinking about what we're talking about. The definition I'm going to be using today really is around personalization as a process, drawing on attributes and actions of individuals or groups of users. And it's all about increasing the relevance of the digital experience. I really see this as an opportunity to do a few things. First off, prioritizing the choices that we're offering to users. Again, setting them loose in that library versus handing them a small stack of books or a couple of magazine articles. Quite a bit of difference there. How do we find those right things to prioritize for the user at a given point in time? Across the board, creating that experience that is highly relevant and very convenient for the user. And from a business standpoint, systematically, not just one time, but systematically improving the results out of your digital efforts. So that's what we'll be talking through today. To kind of guide through that conversation, we're going to start out looking at why personalization is really important to your overall marketing strategy. We'll dive into what I'm calling the two strategic bookends that really frame up and are really the starting point for a successful personalization project. We'll work through a little bit of a process of how to identify and prioritize the most effective pieces for you to focus on within your organization. And we'll talk briefly as well about the landscape of technologies and hopefully, clear a few things up around what's going on there in that technology landscape and some things to think about in terms of selecting and implementing solutions there. Along the way, because I know we're all rushing from one thing to the next, meeting to meeting, a lot of times there's not a lot of time to process what's going on. And so I wanted to include today some points of reflection and just some prompts for you to reflect on. And it might be a place that you want to jot down a couple of notes for yourself, or just a little space in this presentation to make some connections to your own life, to your organization. And the first one of these, just jot down or note in your mind, how are you feeling about your own personalization journey? It could be you're excited, could be you're confused, could be frustrated. I don't know what you're experiencing right now, but maybe kind of check in with yourself, I guess, as they say, and see where you're really at right now. Thinking about where you're coming from, what you've tried in the past, and some of those challenges you've faced and successes, even the small ones that you may have had along the way. So really, to begin, let's consider why we should be thinking about personalization at all. What is it that we hope to be able to achieve? To try to answer that question, Genetric recently put out a consumer survey, and part of that survey focused around questions related to personalized experiences. And so we surveyed, I think, about 600 consumers, and those results are just coming out now. The full results are available online. You see the address on the screen on genetric.com, and then we'll be talking as well in next month's webinar in detail, breaking out some of these results into some different groupings and demographics and things like that. But out of the few areas that we looked at, particularly related to personalization, one of the questions we asked was around expectations. And we found that consumers expect personalization. They want healthcare websites that are personalized to their experience and that are more relevant. Consumers will tell you they don't like impersonal or irrelevant experiences, whether or not they're able to complete their task. We want to create that great experience along the way by adding to the clarity, the simplicity, and the right relevant recommendations along the way. Consumers also say it's frustrating when they get a lot of information that isn't relevant. And, I think we can all relate to an example that just jumps to mind for me is anytime you go out and search for a recipe online and you get that blog post that has, a million photos and the entire narrative of how the person found the recipe, and somewhere in there, in amongst all the ads and the pop-ups and the videos, is the actual set of ingredients instructions for making the thing that you wanted to make. And a lot of times I think on healthcare websites, we fall into the trap of presenting everything because we don't have a lot of tools sometimes to narrow down what it is we're presenting. We just have to kind of throw everything on the screen, and consumers get frustrated. That can add to their frustration in terms of information that is not relevant. And then one of the areas that we really hear a lot of concern about inside of healthcare all the time, and particularly when it comes to personalizing experiences, is privacy. And what we found in asking consumers was that they actually have a high degree of trust in healthcare websites for protecting their privacy and their information. And so it's certainly a trust that we want to maintain, but it's good to know that by and large, consumers are feeling that they can trust healthcare websites with their personal information. On the other side of the coin, in 2021, we conducted a survey of healthcare marketers and asked them about how they're using personalization, what methods they're using, and the sort of impact that they're seeing from it. And what we found is, and we've done this survey for years and years, and the ongoing trend is that personalization is seeing more and more usage in healthcare. Traffic source and campaign were some of the leading methods used when we conducted this survey, and it kind of overtook geography, which had been one of the things that was kind of leading up to that point. So a lot of different methods going on there, but we'll definitely touch on how those two methods factor into a personalization strategy. One of the bigger shifts that we've seen in our own survey of healthcare marketers is the number of respondents that feel that they can actually demonstrate value from their website personalization. A few years ago, we had the surprising result that while there was a decent number of folks working with personalization and using that on their website, by and large, they didn't feel they could actually substantiate the value that it was providing to the organization. So that's always a frustrating place to be in if you're trying a new tactic and in doing something that is strategically important. If you can't really show the value that that's producing, that's quite a struggle. So what we found is that's kind of flipped, and more organizations really feel like they can show the value they're getting out of those personalization efforts. Along the way as well, we asked about what's standing in their way. What are those frustration points that are preventing them from doing more with personalization? And the first out of those is really needing an easier way. And I think we've talked with a lot of organizations. I know I've had conversations with folks who, have adopted different tool sets and have really run headfirst into a lot of frustration and challenges in getting things to actually happen with those. And so I think as the tool sets have evolved over the last several years, and as organizations are taking different slices of personalization, there's opportunity, increasing opportunity, to have some easier approaches to personalization. Not going to say it's just absolutely magic and wave a magic wand and it's all there. But I think things in some ways are getting a little bit easier. So all of this information is available as well if you're interested in our digital marketing trends survey. You can see the address out there, geometric.com/21-trends, if you're interested in the full results of that survey. So just pausing a moment again to reflect, just think for a second about why is this important to your organization? You showed up here today for a reason. You've got something in your mind that you want to achieve with personalization. What is it that is drawing your organization towards personalization? So with that end in mind, I'd like to jump into those strategic bookends. And the question I get is, how do we know? How do we know if this is the next step for us as an organization? We've got a lot going on. It's definitely a flashy, hot topic out there. When do you know that you're ready for that step of personalization? Or if you've already headed down that road and maybe things aren't going how you wanted, what is it that you might be missing along the way? So to try to answer that question, I've really broken down some different layers within the process of creating a personalized experience. And I think this really hinges on a couple of bookends. The first of those is the conversion point. And this ties back to that idea of how are we going to demonstrate success out of our personalization initiatives. So if we're able to actually identify a conversion point, key valuable actions that are accomplished through the digital experience, that these are the actions that drive business results and drive that business value. So if those are in place, that's a great starting point, because if you don't have those, and thinking back maybe 5 or 10 years ago, the only call to action was maybe call a phone number, send an email, those kinds of things. Very hard to track the downstream value of that. In that world, it's very difficult to show what the value is of a change in the experience. Now, as we have organizations doing much more of those conversions online, the actual self-scheduling and booking appointments, and contacting and reaching out, doing lead generation, those kinds of things, it's much easier. We're in a better place to establish the value of those experiences. So that's one of the bookends. The other bookend is that audience. How easily and how well can you identify the audience that you need to actually be making those actions, taking those actions, and be moving through those conversion points? So if you have those two pieces, and you can strongly point to an audience that you're targeting, whether that's through ad campaigns, CRM marketing, whatever you're doing, and you have those conversion points you're driving them towards, the stronger those foundations are, the more we can do in the middle and around them with personalization strategy. So that middle piece really becomes the experience. If we know we have a certain audience on the website in the middle of the digital experience, how do we adjust that experience? How do we change up that sequence of events, the information that's presented, in order to guide them towards that conversion point? And all of this, I want to mention as well, should be wrapped in data. We want to make sure those analytics foundations are there and tying those pieces together. So as we think through this and this approach to a personalization strategy, there's kind of two ways to maybe think about approaching that strategy. One is from that top down, and this is probably the first thing that jumps to mind. is taking that top-down orientation. We're going to set out some big picture strategies, some broad categories, and start implementing tactics that address those broad strategies. So, for example, we're going to boost appointment requests across the board, and we're going to do that through personalization. And that tends to be done in kind of a once and done fashion. So we're going to go implement a series of tactics, and then kind of the project is done, we're going to walk away. So that can work. This isn't necessarily a one way is good, one way is bad, but I want to encourage you to think about this just a little bit differently, particularly as you're trying to get started or you're trying to really build the value in an ongoing personalization program. It can be a great way to start from those specific goals. So a little bit more of that bottom-up approach, starting with the prioritization of the outcomes. We need to boost appointment requests for a specific specialty or specific kind of service. And we're going to just relentlessly go after that particular goal because of the huge amount of business value that is associated with that. So in this way, those specific goals, getting very detail-oriented and prioritizing those against each other, drives that overall implementation of tactics rather than piling a bunch of tactics in under a very broad strategy. Really allows us to focus narrowly on areas of highest potential value, and then we're able to expand on that strategy through real-world learning rather than assuming some things with that big picture strategy and maybe not adjusting along the way. So I wanted to take a moment and reach back to a webinar that we put out in July. Lindsay Steinkamp presented a fantastic webinar called Avoiding the Data Drop-Off, Achieving Meaningful Measurement in Healthcare. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, I would encourage you to go out there because it really is almost a prequel, I think, to this topic today, because it covers really those two bookends and connecting them in the middle. And that's a challenge that we see over and over again. So just to highlight a few points that she covers in that webinar. And you can find all of the webinars out at genetric.com/webinars and watch that recording out there. But she goes through in the webinar the patient journey conversion funnel. And so this is a pretty familiar funnel of awareness all the way through receiving care and the different kinds of strategies that fit into that. But the point that she's really making is what we often see is kind of this shadow, this cloud, this invisible layer that happens towards the bottom. And organizations have a hard time connecting those upstream metrics, how the campaigns have been running, what the visitors to the website, all the traffic and analytics that we have, what actually happens with that as we get into those downstream metrics. And that really relates back to, again, another survey that we've done asking digital marketers what are their biggest barriers to success. The first of these you'll see is the unable to support offline or online transactions with offline operations. And that's kind of that first step of conversions. If you want people to be able to schedule online, you have to have all of those offline operations in place to support online scheduling. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with the challenges that come up when you start to have those conversations. But the focus really of Lindsay's webinar is around the second point of when you have those in place, how do you measure the effectiveness of those transactions, of the journeys towards those transactions and the ROI? And she lays out some hurdles and addresses how to get through those. So assuming you've gone back and watched this and you've got all of those things in place, you've got really strong connections between how you're driving traffic, those audiences that you're attracting, and the results that are coming out. Personalization is really the piece that can help out in the middle, really to optimize that rate of conversions through the funnel and get more from the funnel. So if you've got those in place and you say, actually, we want to get more, we want more business coming through this funnel, there's really two ways to do that. You can drive more traffic into the top of the funnel. You can go out and buy more ads and spend more to get more people into the funnel, and that will work up to a point until you've kind of saturated the market in your space. Or you can work to really optimize those folks that you have in your funnel and prevent them from dropping out in the middle somewhere. And that's where adjusting the experience through personalization by increasing relevance can be really effective, of not necessarily spending more to throw more folks in the top of the funnel, but optimizing that middle of the funnel. So to do that, we're going to start again with that endpoint, that conversion. We're going to think about the audience and then connect that in with the experience. To walk through a few examples here, the place to really start in this is thinking about those conversions. Which actions in your digital experience have the greatest potential for driving growth? So look at those that have direct business value first. Those are the things that are really the money in the door. And I think one of the challenges that is a little bit unique in the healthcare space is a lot of those online conversion points are at least a step or two removed from the actual, the actual revenue side of things. So the further and further you get away from that, the more there's a need to kind of verify what's actually going on. So if people are self-scheduling online, are they actually showing up and following through with the appointment? If they're requesting an appointment online, is that actually going through a couple of steps of follow-up in order to get the appointment booked, and then they're actually showing up to that appointment? So as you prioritize some of those looser metrics, all the way out to kind of engagement metrics, do that appropriately in terms of the level of value that they're actually driving. So some examples here of the kinds of conversions and actions that you might brainstorm and put on a prioritization matrix. This is a great place to use one of those sort of effort value types of matrix. What's going to be get us the most value, which things are going to be the most effort to do. Things like scheduling an after hours visit at an urgent care clinic might be a conversion that needs to be boosted. You can have some looser metrics, like if you're doing a brand campaign and you want people to have watched a video, at least 30 seconds of the new brand video, requesting a new patient appointment, click to call, all of those different entry points that we have for the services that we offer. The next step, kind of taking a step back from those conversion points, is to think about the groups of visitors, the audiences and individuals that you need to help grow and boost those conversions, and how those are targetable. We want to make sure that we're thinking about groups of visitors that can actually be targeted and that will impact those prioritized conversions. So think about both technical attributes as well as behavioral. A lot of times, when you bring up the topic of personalization, people's minds go straight to all of the engagement types of things, click paths and the types of content that people have engaged with. There is a ton of information just off the bat when a visitor lands on your site. That entrance just has a huge amount of information to it and a lot of hooks that can be used for starting into targeting that particular user. Everything from where they landed, where they came from in order to arrive at your site, whether that's a search engine, a campaign, any of those different places, and the information, the depth that they landed in on really can give you some indicators about their intent, the topics that they're interested in. And there's also the whole array of data that comes along with them in terms of geography, their device, and other pieces of information that can be used. And I wanted to mention as well, I guess, when we're talking about geography, a lot of times, we're thinking very pinpointed down to like a, street address level. There's some great things that can be done as well with broader geography. Are they in your core service area or are they further out? Maybe a way to target some of those users to prioritize information just a little bit differently. Other things that are just contextual, time of day, that can be used as well. So thinking through some examples here, using that time of day, they're visiting a certain page outside of regular clinic hours. We might want to prioritize something differently in that experience for those visitors. Obviously, visitors that clicked through a campaign, like a paid social campaign, would be another great example. Those that click through from like a CRM-driven campaign, we're able to tie together then a lot of the information that we may have about those visits from our CRM database and why they were targeted for that campaign with the different changes in the experience that we want to create on the website itself. And then behaviors like repeat visits to the page. And then the last area to consider is what we're going to do about that experience. What is it that we're going to change in order to make that experience more relevant. And some things we can do there is really prioritizing or emphasizing actions in different ways, changing up that information to be more relevant to the user's context. A great example there is if you know they're a new visitor versus a returning visitor, or if they're visiting the website from inside the building, from inside your organization, and you can target the messaging or prioritize the options just a little bit differently because of that. Another thing we can do is create consistency. So if they're engaged with a campaign, can we share that same messaging, the creative and everything through onto the rest of their experience, so there's a consistency to that relationship and to that conversation that you're having with them over time. And then of course, retargeting. So if they land deep in your website and have engaged with a particular topic, they've engaged with a child health topic, and we can continue to put things like pediatric care in front of them as they travel throughout the rest of that experience. So some changes as we're brainstorming what we might do to that experience, might change up the call to action, make it more prominent. We might add or move things around in the navigation just a little bit, matching hero images and copy to campaign messaging, or collapsing or minimizing some of the text as people have engaged with the site on a repeated basis. So just kind of streamlining things, changing up the order of things, really prioritizing those key actions and the things that are important to the user based on their pattern of use. So as you get into those changes to the experience, the question may come up, I don't really know what to do. I don't know what the user needs at this point. And I don't know how to go about improving that experience, or I have a couple of ideas, but we need some more depth of knowledge there. And the place to begin to really have that in place is that deep understanding of the audience. And user experience gives us some great tools for doing that. And so user experience research and a couple of outputs from that can be really helpful in guiding those changes to the overall experience. Personas is one of those, and personas come up a lot of different directions, and there's a lot of variations on what constitutes a persona or what you're trying to do with it. But the great thing about personas is it really gives you a focal point, and it gets everybody that's involved in executing the strategy a shared understanding of who this is that we are trying to reach and what is important to this particular user or this group of users. So here we've got an example of a persona related to a heart campaign. And so we can easily at a glance think through and keep top of mind some of those pain points, some of the actions that this individual wants to be able to take, and make sure as we're going through the personalization process to align with those and really understand how we can prioritize the things that are in line with this user's needs. And this persona really isn't something that you just sit down and write up one day. Ideally, this is coming out of direct research with users, with your actual healthcare consumers, and you've got some basis in that research, things that people have said, actual quotes and actual data backing up sort of this qualitative presentation of those user needs. So this is something that we create all the time at Geonetric that really can help drive a number of different aspects of user experience, whether that's personalization or content development or overall site organization. Really, it's a great mechanism to help humanize and personify that segment. Another piece that really expands on that persona is creating a digital journey map. And so this is kind of step-by-step over time, what is the experience that persona is having, and what are those needs that may change over time. So all of us, as we're going through a particular healthcare journey, we're getting new information along the way. We're learning things. We're not the same person at the end of that journey that we were at the beginning. Things have changed, and we have different needs and different expectations. So by mapping all of that out, understanding those triggers, understanding the things that are needed along the way, can really help suggest some of those changes that we might make to the experience of the user at different points in the journey, and ways that we might identify that a particular persona is at a different stage in the journey, and we maybe need to prioritize different actions and different outcomes for that user. So a lot of information there, but I wanted to just give you a second to reflect on that overall approach. And if in the past maybe you've taken more of that top-down approach, or if you're new to this idea of starting from the bottom up, really starting with some really concrete outcomes that can be prioritized, how might that shift what your next steps along the way might be? And does that open up a little bit of different thinking for you and how you would prioritize efforts and what you might do next? So up next, wanted to walk through putting all of these strategies together into a sustained personalization program. And you'll hear me say sustained quite a bit here. And it's really that idea of shifting from, hey, we're going to go spend the next 3 months doing personalization, and then it's going to be over. We'll have it in place, everything will be great. It's the idea that this is a continual improvement type of project and something that is just an ongoing part of the day-to-day from here out. So an important point to start with is that technology by itself is not a personalization strategy. And see some organizations go out and get really wowed by the shiny technology, and it's kind of that anti-pattern, the what not to do. I know nobody on this call would do that, but organizations go out and buy this big shiny piece of technology and kind of seem to walk away going, the problem solved, we got it figured out. And really, it's not about the technology as much as it is having the capabilities, the capacity, and a plan for the long term. So it means that tech isn't necessarily the holdup. There's likely things you can do to get started on your personalization strategy. It's an important piece of the puzzle, but really we want to think about some of those organizational shifts and the overall program that we're putting in place alongside that technology. And the point here around the program is really that this is just a core part of digital strategy at this stage. It's here to stay. It's a capability that you need in your arsenal, and that can be certainly part of the skill set of your internal team or in collaboration with a vendor partner. Both are valid approaches to that. But I think having that capability at the ready and as an always-on part of what you're doing is really where things are at these days. So finding that success, thinking in a program-oriented sort of way, involves a little bit of a shift in thinking. And so I wanted to go through some of those pieces that may be a little bit more organizational change related, and just to be aware of as you're bringing this into your organization, some ways that you might want to think about how to communicate and how to set this up for success. So the first shift should be obvious. I'm sure everybody on this webinar today, is already really consumer focused and really thinking that way. And everybody also knows that that's a constant battle. It's so easy to slip back into that internal thinking or that internal language and kind of lose sight of the consumer that we should be focused on. So it should go without saying, but I put it on the list here because it is such an important continual focus. The next shift is more towards a data-driven, hypothesis-oriented thought process. So rather than that kind of highest paid person's opinion that you've heard about, that we're going to make a guess and assume that that's right, we want to use as much data as we have available to drive those decisions and to sort out things like prioritization so that we're really focused on areas that we can deliver the most value and have the most likelihood of success. Along with that comes one that I think is sometimes challenging inside of healthcare. It's that fear of failure. And I have failure in quotes because, when you're approaching it in this way, failure is just more learning. You've found something out, whether you've proven your hypothesis right or wrong, you've learned something along the way. And so you have to be comfortable with that idea that things didn't turn out how we expected, but that we are able to continuously learn, apply those learnings, and move forward. If you don't have that acceptance of failure, or the idea that things may not turn out exactly how you're expecting, there's really no point in running the kinds of tests involved in a long-term personalization strategy. If you kind of know everything already, you don't need to go ask questions. So really, we want to be on that side of asking the tough questions, really looking at the answers, and focus on that continual learning, because that's how the whole program grows over time. And again, that idea of a sustained investment. So really need to be in it for the long term. It's not a project or a campaign type of approach. It's something that where the value is really built over time through a lot of small incremental improvements. So I resisted putting a slide of a snowball in here, but it's really that idea of taking just little wins over time and just packing them together and adding them up into something that grows and grows, in that sustained way. So the important thing to know about creating the program around personalization is that you're creating a loop. And along the way, you'll have some activities that look like those on the screen. We've really covered those first three: valuable actions or conversions, the targetable audience, and the modifications to the experience. And the last two here are where those ideas are put out into the real world, and those resulting changes are analyzed for further optimization. The important thing to remember here is, in doing all of this, we're dealing with the complexity of human users, and that is pretty unpredictable. You're not going to get everything right 100% of the time right out of the gate. And so that's why we really need this feedback loop in place in order to find out what actually happens, how those things that we put out there are interpreted and used, and the actions that happen, and then continue to iterate through that. Along the way, in addition to those learnings about your particular users and the particular journeys that you've set up, things change inside the business, and they're changing daily. And that might drive some changes in the personalization program as well. And so there's kind of an input coming from that consumer side, you've got an input coming from the business, and need to kind of continuously loop through this in order to make those changes. So to walk through a few examples and how they fit into this loop, we'll pull some of those ideas forward from those earlier slides where we were looking at some possible valuable actions. In this case, we're going to focus on boosting the usage of our extended hours urgent care self-scheduling. So we need more patients coming in and taking advantage of those extended hours that we put in place at the urgent care facilities, trying to achieve that through personalization and through creating a more relevant experience, digital experience for consumers. So one of the valuable actions is to actually schedule that after hours visit. A way we can do that, an audience we can reach, is people that are already arriving on one of our more generic pages, but they're doing that after hours, sometime outside of those regular clinic hours. So we're going to modify the experience. We're going to make that primary action on the page, the urgent care self-scheduling during that time period. And so in order to do this, and this is kind of pulled from a real example, that all looks pretty simple when you've got it there on kind of sticky notes. It gets a little bit more complicated. And so one of the things that we create when working with clients is this consumer experience map. And this is a way really to communicate the personalization and the design aspects as that comes together. And so that's something to think about as well as you're starting to change up that experience, capturing both those triggers in terms of how we're targeting the users, but also what does that actual change look like? What are the ways that that kind of percolates throughout the digital experience, and doing that in a visual way. So wanted to connect those two pieces. So even though it looks kind of simple when you're looking at sort of that sticky note view, that allows us to get through a lot of content quickly here, but there's a lot of depth that goes into actually planning out that experience and some of the different fringe cases that may be involved in that, and exactly how everything appears across the experience for consistency. So with that design in place and implemented, launching that out there, seeing what actually happens, giving it a period of time, and identifying how that is performing, monitoring, reviewing that over time, and then circling back through that loop in order to see what happened. Did it work? Did we increase the number of self-scheduling appointments at the urgent care in those off hours, or did something else happen that we didn't expect? How are we going to react to that next? So another quick example, just to kind of walk through. In this case, we want to boost visits for pediatric primary care patients, and we want to really encourage. The valuable action here is to request a new patient appointment with a pediatrician. So, we want to identify who are those targetable audiences. Maybe we've got some campaigns going on, some CRM-driven campaigns. We've got folks visiting the site and engaging with, children's health content, with that pediatrics type of content. Let's grab those audiences, change up the experience through the website in a couple of different ways, changing up some of the navigation to make pediatrics more prominent, and maybe matching some things, carrying through some of that campaign information, the hero image or other messaging from the campaign, to make things feel more consistent and more relevant to that audience. Again, going to design that out, launch that, and monitor those results in order to make further changes. So I should mention as well, when you get those results back, sometimes it's the thing you expect, sometimes it's not. And if it's really not the thing you expect, that may be an opportunity as well for a little bit more user research. And even just a small amount of user research may really reveal something that wasn't obvious. Again, inside the building, to us as healthcare marketers, it may seem really obvious. Just getting a couple of users to walk through that experience can really reveal maybe where some of the sticking points are, what's going on, if it's not a real straightforward kind of result from those personalization experiments. So reflecting on the idea of a program and your own organization, just take a moment and think through, out of those shifts in thinking, which one of those is really maybe most top of mind for you at your organization. And that was things like moving towards a consumer focus, making data-driven decisions, focusing on that continuous learning and those feedback loops, and making a sustained investment in a program. All right, and with that, we'll shift over to talking just a little bit about technology. And there's a ton we could go into here, and a lot of it becomes sort of that consultant answer of, well, it depends. And so try to break down a little bit of what's going on in the technology landscape when it comes to personalization, and just a few of the things that at least go into my thought process when I'm looking at that landscape and recommending a set of solutions. The first thing that comes to mind for me is this kind of muddled mess that we deal with in healthcare. There are quite a few systems or possible systems in place there, and they all hopefully talk to each other or relate to each other in some interesting and challenging ways. All of that information that we have about the consumers in our market may live in a huge variety of different places, whether that's information, just basic information that's happening in web analytics and through your website, whether that's detailed private information that's in the electronic medical record, or in a bunch of systems that you may have in place that kind of sit somewhere in the middle of all of that. We have authenticated experiences like patient portals. I'd say portals plural, because a lot of organizations have more than one place to go sign in as a patient to access information. We're doing a lot of really targeted, interesting marketing things, if that's marketing automation or campaign management in different ways using ad platforms. So all of those pieces have different parts of the information about the user, and it can be a lot to really sort through and think about. We can get hung up on the idea of, do they talk to each other or not? And so I think it's important to kind of pick this apart and really focus on the changes that we're trying to make, the impact that we're trying to have, and what is the thin slice through all of these that can help us get to those goals. Alongside this landscape inside of the healthcare industry, within the platform space as well, I'm sure many of you have seen this. There's been just some interesting things going on in terms of the shift that the platforms are making as well over the last several years. So if you're looking at digital experience platforms and other tool sets around the MarTech stack, a lot of vendors in the DXP space in particular have been making a shift from very broad unified systems, kind of that monolithic big system that does all of the things all inside of one system, and breaking that apart, acquiring other solutions, and going with more of what's called a composable approach, where each piece is pretty independent. There's integration between the parts, and you get to pick and choose just a little bit more about how you're going to use each of those pieces. And so the analogy that I'm drawing here is you've got that unified system that's really like that out of the box, dollhouse. You can put it together pretty much one way. It's gonna work a certain way. You can certainly decorate it. You can add furniture and things to it, but the overall structure is going to be a certain way. Versus on the composable side, it's a little bit more like Lego bricks of what do you want to make today? How are you going to take these pieces and put them together to solve a problem that you have in front of you? So you can definitely see on the left, if you want a house and you want the house to be structured like that, the dollhouse is a much faster way to get that result. But if you don't quite fit that model, you want to do something a little bit different, or you need something smaller to start and grow with, the composable solution, the Lego bricks are going to offer you more flexibility, more different options, and are going to be easier to upgrade and change out over time. And that's really, I think, why the vendors are really focused on that as a strategy, is being able to move the different pieces of the digital experience platform and of that suite of products forward more quickly, a little bit more independently. So something to keep in mind there of these options that are out there. The thing in the meantime to be aware of is there can be some challenges around the actual state of integration of those pieces, and the way that the particulars of each of those platforms really fit with the needs of maybe a healthcare digital experience. Not everything from every vendor is going to be a great match. It's not necessarily even across the board at this point, although I think the hope is that everything gets a little bit more stable. To think through the technology, I want to go back to those layers of personalization that we've been working through, and really break this apart in a way to think through the way that technology lines up with those layers, because again, there's a lot there. There's a lot of different technologies, a lot of pieces to that puzzle. So I think it's helpful to maybe split apart those pieces on the left, the analytics and conversion. Really, the analytics becomes about getting systems to talk to each other. It's about creating unified views and sharing data. And the conversion piece in healthcare, a lot of times it's very dependent on third-party systems, on operational constraints, and it's being driven a little bit outside of the control, maybe of the digital experience group or the marketing group, to really set the direction on all of that. So we'll kind of set that aside for today and dig into the pieces on the right just a little bit more, because they really touch more directly onto the consumer experience. They're tightly tied to the things that are driving audience identification, and there's still quite a range of options there. This is a lot of the systems then that come up when you start thinking about personalization. How are we going to take an audience and deliver an experience? And so to think through that and break that apart, I wanted to kind of split things up just a little bit, because a lot of times it feels like an all or nothing type of approach. And there's a lot of different layers inside of those solutions. So this may seem a little complex, but the idea here is that when you're combining audience and experience together, it's really about thinking through the value that you can create, what are the opportunities you have to create value, and then matching the level of effort, the level of complexity, and making sure it's in check with that overall value. So again, going back to those bookends, if you don't have solid conversion options in place, or you have just a handful, or you're not able to really clearly identify the key audiences that are important to that journey, you're only going to be able to create so much value out of personalization. And you want to make sure that you're not over-investing in technology compared to that result that you're going to be able to get. So some ways you can control that complexity or the effort that's involved. I've broken them down here into three kind of bars, three different areas. One is around the user profile. So there's a whole range of options, whether you are doing changing up the experience based on just behaviors without really having a profile. You can have non-identified profiles, or you can go all the way to the extreme of having people sign in. You've got an authenticated user and a lot of information about that individual to be able to tailor that experience. Similarly, on the scope of use, starting out on the easy end, you can do things on a single page or a single visit in order to tailor that experience. On the far end of that, you can be trying to think omni-channel and making sure that no matter what device or experience that a person interacts with, that it's consistent with all of the others at the same time. So a lot to think about there, a lot of exciting things that are possible when you have that in place. But again, realizing the level of effort and the complexity involved in that. And then the last group is really around the experience itself. How does that experience get modified, and what kind of tools are there within the technology to change up that experience? And again, on the less effort side of the equation, you have things that are a little bit more rules-based. If this happens, then show that. If the user matches this group, then move this button to the top and make it flash. As you move along the complexity there, and a lot of times these are additional layers within the technology, you start to get more intelligent kinds of recommendations, maybe search and relevancy types of engines in there that are using AI and machine learning and some of those flashy technologies to magically recommend content to users. And further up that complexity, we have systems that, when you're particularly working on a more one-to-one basis, can target those next best actions and individualized pieces of content to users. So quite a range of options there. And what I hoped you would get out of this is just thinking through, what do we really need? What can we really get value out of in order to get started along this pathway sooner? We're not going to wait until we have everything at the far right of this chart in order to get started. There are things that can be done today with a little bit of lower bar, a little lower hurdle to get over to get started there. So as you're thinking about technology, some questions that should be top of mind here. What do you have today? Getting a map of that landscape and just understanding what lives where and why is pretty important. As I mentioned, making sure there's sufficient strength in those bookends, in the audience and the conversions, and understanding the kind of technology investment and the kind of program that value can create. Maybe going back to that end of things and really strengthening those two bookends in order to have a solid foundation for your personalization efforts. And then thinking through those small steps, those small layers of technology that can be added to really get that program started. So it doesn't have to be everything out of the gate, but can we start with a few things? Some of those testing and rules-based platforms, doing things that are a little bit more, that don't necessarily require a full user profile or integration across different systems in order to start improving the results from our digital experience. So one more quick reflection here, just thinking through for a minute, what technology do you have in place, and what small additions might you need to grow from there? So with that, I wanted to kind of sum it up here real quick and highlight a few key takeaways that I hope you're walking away with today. The first is the idea that personalization is really an opportunity to improve business results. So that's really the focus of what we're trying to do here. We can do that by creating more relevant experiences and really focusing those around the business value. Hopefully you got the bookends that I've been talking about. You really have to understand the outcomes and the audience's ends of things in order to get the greatest value out of personalization. That it's not just about technology, it's technology plus the strategic program. And that we're going to go through this process, prioritizing efforts based on value within that sustained program, and that allows us to grow over time, that sort of snowball effect to continue to build on the learning and all of the success that you have along the way. So just wanted to mention as well, this is work that we do at Geonetric, and there's a couple of different pieces of that work that we tackle. And the first of those is kind of the straight up personalization optimization services. So working through a program like I've described here, all of the parts of that to plan and execute the personalization programs and optimization through the digital experience, working with you to set that strategy. The second piece is that part around user experience, whether that's doing user-centered experience design, doing the user research, developing personas, doing digital journey mapping, or auditing an existing experience in order to understand more about how consumers are interacting with you digitally. And then we also offer technology solutions. So those platforms and evaluating technology to help create those personalized experiences, and to do that within the context of healthcare. So with that, I'll throw it back over to Shannon to tell you a little bit more about the webinar we have coming up next month.
Thanks, David. Yes, don't miss our next live webinar, Geonetric's 2022 Consumer Health Survey Report. It helps healthcare marketers like you get new insights and see where you need to invest to stay competitive in 2023. You can discover consumer needs and meet them where they want you to be. In this webinar, you find out what our 2022 Consumer Health Survey revealed. And that's at geonetric.com/webinars. You can be prepared for the webinar by downloading the results of our 2022 Consumer Health Survey with this link here, geonetric.com/2022-consumer-survey.
All right, with that, thank you for attending today, and that concludes today's webinar. If you do have any questions, happy to follow up. Just reach out at hello@geonetric.com, and you can also put some information into the survey if you'd like some outreach as well. Thank you.